Allora, quindi adesso
Now we are going
il
to
nostro argomento successivo sarà come
talk about how to bread and make a perfect frying to avoid imperfections during the cooking processes. This is for meat cutlet. So we prepared our clarified butter, as we saw in the previous part of the class. We filtered it with some kitchen paper. The temperature we're going to use is around 150-155 degrees. We can also get to 160. A lot depends on the thickness of the meat. What do we mean by this? When we're going to bread our meat, the Milanese cutlet must be pink inside. It mustn't be overcooked. But since it is so thick, we're around 1.5 cm/2, and we have the bone that disturbs the cooking of the meat. If we were using a temperature that's too high, we would have a browning external phase quite quickly, and inside it would remain raw. So always remember that when your deep frying has a quite high volume, so for example arancini, which are fried rice balls, always remember to work at lower temperatures. So around 170 degrees, which are the most commonly used degrees for frying in general. So smaller pieces, increase the temperature. Bigger pieces, lower temperature, 150, 160. Always remember to prepare everything you need before you start. We have our tray with beaten eggs. We have our breadcrumbs. We used a breadcrumb with a medium grain size because we want to have a certain crunchy consistency. Sometimes we use a finer type of breadcrumbs, and other times we use a rougher type of breadcrumbs like panko when we want it even crunchier and more golden outside. We have our veal piece of meat. It is taken from the loin part of the veal. We can have the classical elephant ears, and we have the middle part that we're still using anyways. We're going to remove a small part of the fat here outside. This is more of a part that we define like a sort of blanket. And then we're going to make some incisions like this. Why? Because we're going to have to cut the fiber that would bring the meat to curl up during the cooking. So just incisions externally. This type of thing is also done with some preparations that we do by grilling when you cook a Fiorentina and entrecot, a T-bone, basically. So this prevents them from curling up. Then what we're going to do is, there are many schools of thought. There are people who coat it in flour. We're going to do a double breading, so egg, breadcrumbs, breadcrumbs, Always remember that we're just giving advice. There is no right way. Flour, we're not using it because if it doesn't fix thoroughly, it can create a sort of paste that during the chewing will kind of be felt. If you don't work well with the flour, when you submerge it in eggs, flour forms an isolation, so you risk that the egg doesn't adhere to the meat. Now what we're going to do is pass our meat in the eggs. Push it a little bit too. Strain it. And then Step 2, breadcrumbs like this. Putting some pressure. You have to try to let the breadcrumbs adhere. Why is this so important? Because during the cooking, if you don't push nicely, the water in the meat will form some steam. And if the breading doesn't stick thoroughly to the meat, it will open. We're going to remove it, and we're going to go back into the egg. Always giving it a slight pressure. Don't ever do this movement, otherwise you're moving the breading around. Then you're going to take it, strain the excess eggs. Put breadcrumbs on top and pressure it. We finished the first phase. Always remember this. It's very important. When you finished breading, in general for every deep fried food, always wait a few seconds. That the presence of the breadcrumbs allows eventual liquids that are coming out to be absorbed. Before deep frying, just slightly remove the excess, and then we're going directly in the deep fryer, gently. Use some tongs because we're making a deep fried fish, meat, inside a deep fryer where the meat is not in contact with the heat source. So here we are actually in contact with the heat source. Every now and then just turn on and turn off the heat to increase or lower the temperature based on what you think is best. So do it especially when you're frying with a pan. In the deep fryer, you're just going to have a constant temperature. And we're going to stir gently. Always move it a little bit like this, very gently. Turn the heat off. Remember that clarified butter is a good heat vehicle. So even though we turn off the heat, there won't be a very fast temperature decay. So either move from the pan or just move it around with your tongs. You can see that in the perimeters we already have a much browner color, and I'm explaining you why, because it is the closer part to borders to the sides of the casserole, and it's warmer there, close to the metal, compared to the central part. When you stir, always use tongs, never insert forks, knives that might ruin the meat. You can see even here, this is the closest part to the bone that is browning a little bit less. We're turning off the heat, because close to the bones there are more water residues that tend to wet the meat a little bit more. We're done. Lifting. We're going to put it in our tray to dry out a little bit. We're going to let it dry on both sides. You can also slightly pat it with some paper to remove the excess fat. And remember one very important thing. Always wait a few minutes because it won't cool down. We're talking about no more than 1 minute. It won't cool down because we just removed it from a very high temperature, but also because the breading creates a sort of barrier that does not allow the internal heat to come out. Wait 1 minute for all of the juices in the meat redistribute to avoid that we have a great loss of liquid when we cut through it. And the Milanese cutlet finishes its plating up by putting a spoon of clarified butter on top of the meat to make it shiny, even though we wouldn't need it. But this is the tradition. We have to explain everything. So a spoon of clarified butter directly on the meat and a pinch of salt. And our Milanese cutlet is finished.